Okay, well, hello, buenos dias, everybody, and yes, it's Profesor, and as you can clearly see, or probably make out, maybe you can't tell right now, but I'll indicate in just a second here. I am actually here in Detroit. I'm here in the Motor City, so I'll be here for the next few days, and I guess in kind of keeping with the tradition with these videos, I seem to record them in different places or something crazy seems to happen, such as one of the videos in which Nick definitely tried to make his presence felt. But hopefully for the final video for next week for the final installment of the Daughter Fortune readings, it'll be a little bit more normal circumstances in which I'm not in a motel, I'm not in Michigan, or one of my fuzzy friends decides to make his or her presence felt. But you never know. So we'll just see what happens next week as we get to the final. Excuse me, as we get to the final installment of the Daughter Fortune videos. All right. Before we get to that, let me quickly tell you a little bit about where I am. Obviously, you can clearly see I'm in a hotel room, and this is the hotel that is part of the DoubleTree chain, and this is the section of Detroit that was actually an old British fort. The British established this fort. This is the area known as Fort Shelby. Obviously, there's nothing left of the fort now. It was a fort that was constructed back in the late 18th century. So we're talking about the 1770s when the fort was built. But if you had indication of the we didn't really cover too much about Midwestern history in the focus of the class. But as you've probably seen from some of the maps that we had early on in the semester, you've seen how the Midwest, the Great Lakes area, was definitely a focus of battle between various factions. Of course, the French, then the English came in, and of course the Native Americans. So this whole area was really important during the French and Indian War and the American Revolution. Remember, that was the French. They came here first, establishing the place in 1701. Once the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1763. Then all of these areas turned over to the British, and this area was, of course, a focus of a lot of the battles that took place during the War of 1812. So definitely a lot of history here in the city. And in terms of modern history, the architecture right here in the city definitely harkens back to, you might say, the heyday of the city. At one point in time, Detroit was called the Paris of the Midwest. You wouldn't know that now in reading all the stories about the problems the city has had. And of course, right now, in fact, as I'm speaking right now, the federal judge, the bankruptcy judge, he'll be making a decision soon in terms of whether the big bankruptcy plan that the city has in place can proceed forward. So a lot of moving parts, a lot of moving pieces to the jigsaw puzzle, so to speak. So just keep track of the news. I'm sure in the local news. So whatever news you watch, if it's one of the networks or the cable, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, undoubtedly they'll talk about what's happening in Detroit with respect to the bankruptcy. But before I talk about the Daughter Fortune and Who Built America stuff, let's see if we can take a quick peek. We'll take a panorama of the city here. So let's see if this works. Let me just tilt the camera over there, so hopefully you guys can see some of that. Obviously, that architecture harkens back to a more bygone period. Some of the stuff looks kind of creepy here, like you would see in those horror monster Dracula, Frankenstein type of movies. Let's see if you guys can get a better look going over in this direction here. Okay, and I don't know if you can see, but down there, that's actually the TV station, the NBC affiliate. Okay. Oh, and straight ahead, that's a casino. The MGM Grand is off in the about in the middle of your phone, and behind that is the Motor City Casino. So casino gambling, that's been one of the things that's been going on in the city in recent years. One of the measures designed to try to restore some revenue to the city. I think it's had some mixed results at best, but it seems to be a fixture of the city. I don't think there's going to be an expansion for more enterprises to come in. But nonetheless, these casinos and hotels do bring up pretty good pretty good crowd, but not enough to really justify what the expectations were a few years ago. Okay, well that's just a quick panorama, a little bit of a historical, cultural, political, economic sketch of the city. Let's go ahead and get on with the Daughter Fortune and Who Built America stuff. And before I actually get to that, let me just quickly make one final housekeeping item, and I actually touched upon this when I had the video or the two videos about posting your videos into your character videos into Blackboard. Remember, everybody, December 1st. That's the new due date in which I want two things. That is your videos themselves. So this gives you into the Thanksgiving weekend to work on it. So if you're not traveling, if you got a couple days or during the break, you can definitely use that time to work on your videos. So Monday, December 1st, get your videos in, and also that's the day in which I want all your comments, that is your replies to everybody else in the group, which of course includes me as well. So again, and I'll just keep re-emphasizing this point in case there's any lingering confusion about that. But what I mean by comments, I mean the totality of both your original comments or your original answers, and then the replies, the responses that you make to others in the group. So when you choose a question and then you answer it, that's an original comment. That's what I want on the due dates in the respective forums. But a reply, that's when you reply, you respond to somebody else that's in the group. Could be and of course, that could be me as well. I'm sorry I haven't had a chance to really join in discussion that much over the past few days. Obviously, I had some other stuff to take care of. But while I'm here, and I'll be here in Detroit for a few days, I'll definitely every day check and reply to as many people as possible over the next few days before my flight back to Ontario coming up. This will be coming up into Wednesday of next week. Okay, I think that's it for housekeeping. So let me go ahead and do what I did. I'll do the format I did for last week, in which I'll talk about the Daughter of Fortune items first, and then do a quick comparison with the Who Built America items. And the Who Built America readings was, of course, Chapter 9 for this week. All right. Now I've got to do what I did when I had the video. I think that was when I recorded for you back at the Travelodge. I've got my Daughter of Fortune notes right here on my iPod. This isn't an iPhone. I have a lot of the gadgets, but iPhones are the ones that I haven't really gravitated toward. But virtually everything else that Mr. Jobs and Mr. Cook have done over the years, I kind of move toward that. All right, the Daughter Fortune readings corresponded to the pages, which were chapters 15 through 17, and those chapters were El Dorado. Let me just business dealings, and Soiled Doves. So those were the three chapters that corresponded with the readings. You know, Allende doesn't list the actual chapter numbers as you've seen. So I took the liberty to go ahead and do that for you over these past few weeks. So these three chapters look at the events happening starting off in as we get into 1850. And 1850, of course, is a pivotal year because that's the year California becomes a state. As you've undoubtedly guessed as you got through the readings, California virtually grew up overnight. Once the people rushed in, there was enough population to establish statehood. So on the one hand, it seemed like a pretty good idea. Okay, we got a lot of people here. That's great. We can petition for statehood. We could be part of the U.S. Blah blah blah. But it seemed like in California it was moving too fast. The institutions didn't really have enough time to, shall we say, mature, much like they had done in other parts of the United States. Of course, we're talking about the original colonies and some of the southern southern states which appeared at the tail end of the 18th century, and some of the early Midwestern states coming up into the early parts of the 19th century. Those regions had enough time to develop and mature the institutions, judicial, political, civil society, all of that stuff. But California didn't really have that, and I think that would have a lot of repercussions that would really come to the forefront in the late 19th or 20th century. I get into more of that, of course, in the California class, which I actually have a section coming up in the spring semester. But in terms of El Dorado, the El Dorado chapter, it's And let me take my glasses off so I can get a better look at the information here. It's late 1849 November, and we see the scene happening here in which it's a chaotic situation. Eliza comes across what appears to be a bear and bull fight. The Californios, the Mexican Californians, did a lot of shall we say crazy stuff back in those days. They had bull fights, bear fights, dog fights, whatever you want to call it. And early American visitors into the area, they were shocked, they were outraged. My gosh, this is horrible. This is disgusting. It's sick. It's nasty. It's evil. It's sinful. Blah blah blah. But when you have when you have that type of lifestyle in which people work hard during the day, they're up from from a sunrise to sundown. Not surprisingly, they want to have these festivals, these rituals, these contests, these dances, fandangos, tertulias, jarabe tapatío, these traditional folk dances. So in the Mexican Hispanic mindset, this is common, this is natural. But of course, in the Anglo-American mindset, that was horrible. It was horrific. And a lot of the writings that many North Americans were writing back to their friends and families back in, shall we say, here in Detroit, Chicago, Charleston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, wherever. A lot of them were saying, these Californios, they're really gracious and this and that. The ladies are beautiful and they have so much food and wine. We love them. But they're lazy, they're slothful, they're violent, they're this, they're that. That was a lot of the tone that many North Americans, or the attitude they had about the Californios. So what I end up talking about here in chapter 15 is in essence a reflection of some of the beliefs and ideologies in terms of how many North Americans, Anglo Americans, and Protestant Americans begin to have these dim views of not just Mexicans, but of course people of different races, different colors, and Catholic too. So I end up touches upon some of this as well, but. The important point about this chapter is that Eliza, she comes into her own as she goes about her adventures trying to find her lover Joaquin. She describes many of the characters she encounters. Allende writes that Eliza had fallen in love with freedom. She compared her new life to her previous life in the Summers home, and she talks about how not just men but women are also doing the idea of inventing equality. So that's a very important point, and I think it goes to the focus of reinventing oneself, which I've been talking a lot about in a lot of these previous videos. As the story proceeds, Joaquin seems to fade from Eliza's memory, so she has to keep reading a lot of the letters to basically remind herself, oh yeah, I was in love with Joaquin. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm here in the first place. So interesting that Allende or Eliza has to recall exactly why she came to California in the first place. Eliza, like Paulina, who we'll talk a little bit more about in just a second, discovers the key to success in California. It's not being a miner, but by doing things for the miners, whether it's cooking or in this case writing letters, which she does, and then she encounters the traveling body show, the traveling sideshow with the carnival show, the girls, you might say the early version of the circus freaks, so to speak. So we meet some of those characters. These were things which are really common in the West and in California, and that's what Allende finishes off chapter 15 with. Okay, in chapter 16 we get a little bit more about what Paulina is doing. This is a chapter called Business Dealings. Captain John Summers is in California, is in San Francisco with the stuff that Paulina had ordered, including ice, which of course was very important to refrigerate a lot of the early commodities. So refrigeration, of course, didn't come into the scene into the latter part of the 19th century. So ice was a way to preserve the fruits and vegetables and various perishable commodities in the ships. Okay, we see more about what Jacob Todd is up to now. Jacob is Jacob Fremont. Some of you have commented how he's at one hand the most intriguing character, but on the other hand he's the most unappealing character. He can't seem to decide what to do. He's constantly bouncing from job to job, from place to place. But again, I think that goes to the core of the idea of reinventing oneself. And whereas you might say Eliza and Paulina represent that for the women of the story, Jacob Fremont or Jacob Todd seems to do that for the men in the story. Okay, let's see what else. What else about chapter 16? I need to mention here. Okay, we go back to Eliza's encounters with Joe Bonecrusher and the girls. We meet more about who the various people are from the group. We come across the Indian boy who doesn't say too much. There's Babalu the Bad, a very interesting character. There are the two sisters from Missouri. There's a Mexicana who's among the group. So obviously, what I end up pointing out here is that in California, it's a wild mixture of people. There's really, you might say, no rhyme and reason for these people to be together, except for, you might say, the idea of reinventing oneself, and for the economic motive, that is the purpose of making money. Making money and making a living. So that's so again, this goes to a lot of the important themes that we've seen so far in the story. All right, and finally, chapter 17, and then I'll talk a little bit about the Who Built America stuff. It's a chapter, Soiled Doves. It's December of 1849, and Joe and the girls have settled into a barn. They come across James Morton, who was a Quaker blacksmith. So obviously, we're seeing a lot of different religious groups here in California as well. And then by January of 1850, we begin to see a little bit more about the social and ethnic tensions between the various factions. And I'll touch upon this a little bit more when I get to the Who Built America readings. But keep in mind that. Of course, many of the Americans who came into California already had preconceived notions about other people, whether they were African American, whether they were Native American, and in this case, whether they spoke Spanish. So, not surprisingly, Mexicans and to a lesser extent Chileans felt the wrath of a lot of these Anglo-American miners and their prejudices, their ideas. California enacted these two laws. One called the Land Law and one called the Foreign Miners Tax, which ostensibly were designed to clear up some of the economic and social problems, political problems of the region. But all of those laws really did was target not just one, but two sets of the Mexicans who were in California. The Foreign Miners Tax was a direct assault on a lot of the Mexican miners from northern Mexico who had good mining skills, taught to that they learned from the Spaniards. They brought those skills, and they were quite successful among the early miners in 1848, 1849. But by 1850, Anglo-American miners wanted to drive them out. So the Foreign Miners Tax attacked, you might say, the lower and the lower class Mexicans, and then the Land Law of 1851, that attacked, you might say, the middle class and upper middle class of Californians, the Mexicans who had been in the region for a long time and had vast expenses of land from Southern California all the way up toward the Bay Area. So I doesn't get into a little bit more about that, but I thought I'd go ahead and just touch upon what's happening in the state in terms of measures that were designed to go to the heart and, you might say, destroy Mexican culture in California. Okay, let me see what else. We also meet an interesting character by the name of Jack, Three-Finger Jack. What's happening now is that stories about a bandido, a Robin Hood figure, are emerging in California. That is, he's avenging the injustices that are being inflicted upon the Mexican miners, whether it was at the hands of Anglo-Americans and by Australians too. Australians, they were quite a nasty bunch. I get a little bit more about the Australians in the California class, but if you thought the Americans were bad, the Australians were really bad news. Kind of in keeping with the Australian character that you see in the Foster's beer commercials, or the music of early AC/DC, especially when Bon Scott was a singer. He, you might say, epitomized the mean and nasty, rugged Australian guy. I don't know how I got into ACDC talking about it, but ACDC's been in the news. You probably seen the stuff about the drummer. But again, my point is Australians always seem to have this rough and tumble attitude, especially with rugby and of course all the other sports that they play in the Foster's commercials. But Australians in California were really rough and nasty. I would say in many cases even more so than their Anglo-American minor counterparts. Okay. Also, the last thing I want to finish off with, and in this chapter, is that it's in March of that year. Eliza now is 18, but of course she's seen quite a bit in her young life. She might say seen a lot that a woman in her late 20s, early 30s would definitely experience, but she experiences that at age 18, and then we see where the town begins to rally around Joe and the caravan show when something tragic happens at that point in time. All right, so that's what's happening in chapter 17. So again, the story is taking us into early 1850, the spring of 1850, and I'll finish off with what happens from that point in time to the end of the story, of course, in the final video. All right, let me set this aside, and I'll say a couple quick things about what's happening in Chapter 9 from the Who Built America text. Okay, Chapter 9 takes us from the spread of slavery into the crisis of Southern society. Among the topics that we're seeing here is you might say the precarious nature of the preservation of slavery and what it had to take to really preserve the slavery system. What we're seeing here is a lot more political and religious tracts, economic documents. Papers, pamphlets, which are basically saying, "Oh no, but slavery is good. Slavery is because slavery is good for both the Southern whites and for African Americans too. Because if you don't have slavery, then African Americans, they're going to struggle in the free labor market in the North. They're going to freeze to death. They're going to do this, do that, blah blah blah. They don't have the capabilities to survive in the North. But in this slave system, we take care of them, we feed them, this and that. That's basically the essence of what a lot of these thinkers in the South were starting to say about slavery toward the late 1830s through the 1840s and into the early 1850s. But of course, when these types of writings came out, many Northerners began to push back, and here's where we begin to see more of the abolitionists and William Lloyd Garrison, and of course a lot of the preachers from the North. And one of the interesting ironies about the anti-slavery movement, the abolitionist movement, is that there was actually an element of, you might say, hatred toward African Americans. Let me explain exactly. And again, this is stuff that's actually mentioned quite nicely in chapter 9. As we get into the 1840s, into the early 1850s, the idea of a free labor, free soil, that's becoming more and more apparent. Many, as the U.S. starts to expand further and further west by taking the territory from Mexico, following the U.S.-Mexico War, and of course before they had the Louisiana Purchase. So you might say since the beginning of the 19th century, the U.S. territory had pretty much doubled in size over the span of about a century. So by 1850, compared to 1800, the U.S. was just a completely different animal, different beast, so to speak. So for many Northerners, the fear was that by expanding slavery, that would tear apart the root at the fabric of Northern society, which of course was based on the idea of free work, free labor. Many people in the North still had the idea that what you did in life in terms of your work, even though the wage system was becoming more apparent in larger cities, of course, like Baltimore, Boston, Philadelphia, New York, New Haven, Providence, and so forth, there was still that belief that work was good. Work was something which was a symbol of your character. And this goes back to the Protestant ethic, with Martin Luther, John Calvin, all of those guys. Predestination. If you work hard in life, if you do this, you do that, you're pious, then maybe you'll have a pretty good path to salvation. So for many abolitionists, anti-slavery people, the thinking was that slavery, what that did was that was the demeaning work. That was making work something that was nasty and filthy, and you didn't want to touch it. It was grimy, slimy, that's this type of thing. That is, and because And because in the South, African Americans were, you might say, doing the work that maybe people in the North had been doing, the feeling was that black people, they were somehow demeaning what the work that white people was doing. So there was that dimension. That is, you wanted to stop slavery because what the black slaves were doing was essentially making the work that you were doing in the North demeaning, meaningless, just something that had no social value whatsoever. So you see what I'm getting at, everybody? This was the idea that many people in the North had at the time. I would say that both people in the North and the South had similar views toward African Americans. But the feeling was that in the North, because African Americans were doing the work um, that workers, people in the shops, whether it was in Cincinnati, Detroit, Chicago, in Indianapolis, or of course any of the people and cities in the East, that somehow, because African Americans were doing that work in New Orleans, in Charleston, at Atlanta, and then going on into Texas by the late 1820s and into 1830s. That was making people in the North quite upset from that perspective. And of course, there was a religious component too with respect to slavery is something that God hates. It's a sin. It's this and that. But as you recall from the podcast that Dr. Moss was talking about with the idea of the curse of Ham, the Southerners were saying, well, in the Bible, there's slavery, and what the African Americans are doing, that's just part of the process, blah, 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 that type of thing. So that was a perspective going on from the South. So basically, having said all of that, and of course economic issues, politics, which are covered in Chapter 9, we're getting, you might say, into a point of no return in which North and South can't reconcile the differences on political, economic, and social lines. And what happens is, as we get into into California, and okay, sorry, everybody, but I'm coming to the I'm coming to the end of the video, so just bear with me. I'll wrap up in just about a minute here. As the U.S. expands further toward the West, the feeling in the U.S. is, what do we do about those lands? What do we do about California? What do we do about what do we do about New Mexico? What do we do about all these other lands like Utah and Nevada, all of these places? So California, in essence, is going to help contribute to the irrepressible conflict, I think, which was Lincoln's term. That is, it was going to further the split between North and South, but also too. The fact that people in the South who were coming into California, and to a lesser extent those in the North, they already had these preconceived notions in terms of people of color, people of Native American backgrounds. So those prejudices that people had in their home places, it didn't matter if it was, say, New York or Boston or Charleston and New Orleans. As they were coming to California, they brought those prejudices with them, and they just translated them to the people who were already there or coming there. Whether it was the Mexicans, whether it was the Chileans, whether it was the Native Americans, and of course whether it was toward the Asians as well, especially the Chinese, and then later on, of course, into the early 20th century, into the Japanese as well. So you see what's happening, everybody. You might say California is going to become like a collision zone of all these different ideas and factors and belief systems and religions. And even though California in the short term, you might say, really fulfills the idea of manifest destiny for the United States, over the long term, it only contributes more to the growing split between North and South. So if you look at things in that perspective, it's really no surprise that once California became a state in 1850, it would just be a matter of time before the nation would go into total chaos less than a decade after that. Okay, all right. Well, this video almost ran a half hour, but I do hope that in this installment we got a pretty good perspective of not only what's happening in the story, but in terms of how events in the United States around that time are starting to filter their way into California as well. Okay, one more video to go, and that'll wrap up. These videos about the story. So when I talk to you guys again, I'll definitely be back in my home headquarters with my fuzzy friends running all over the place. And don't be surprised if maybe Mr. Nick decides to come in and say hello for one more time. Okay, well that's it, everyone. That's it from Detroit, and I'll talk to you guys again next week.